Here's what to expect today.
And if that's the kind of person you need, then great. I mean, if the job is hard and they're going to be put to the test every day, then do that, right? Like put them through a process that tests their resilience, right? But the interview process is the impression that you're giving them of your company as well. So there is a statistic, I can't quite quote, I think it's 41% of employees will leave if they don't, like if the recruiting process doesn't feel safe. Yes. Because they're like, I don't want to work for a company who's doing that to me.
The adventure of entrepreneurship and building a life and business you love, preferably at the same time, is not for the faint of heart. That's why Heather Pierce Campbell is bringing you a dose of guts, grit, and great business stories that will inspire and motivate you to create what you want in your business and life. Welcome to the Guts, Grit, and Great Business Podcast, where endurance is required. Now here's your host, the legal website warrior, Heather Pierce Campbell.
Okay, welcome. Hello, I am Heather Pierce Campbell, the legal website warrior. I'm an attorney and legal coach based here in Seattle, Washington. Welcome to another episode of Guts, Grit, and Great Business. I'm super excited to share my guest today. She was a former Seattleite. I'm wishing that she was still here so I could call her my neighbor, but we've got the Seattle connection. Welcome to Erin Longmoon. Hi,
Thank
Erin.
You. Hi. It's so good to be here. Thank you.
Absolutely. So good to see you today.
Good to talk to fellow Seattleites.
That's right. Well, and I love it. We're sharing like the gray walls and we're talking about losing our life, right? We're feeling it. But
yeah.
Okay. For listeners, for those of you that don't know Erin's mission, and Erin Longmoon, and I love your last name. It sounds, yes, like I'm sure there's a story there, but maybe that will come later. Okay. Yes. So Erin Longmoon's mission in life is to eradicate toxic workplaces. She believes that everyone deserves to love their job and feel like they are contributing to a greater purpose. As the owner of Zephyr Recruiting LLC, she accomplishes this mission by matching great small businesses with their right fit employees. And I'm really excited about this concept of right fit. Erin has more than 2 decades of experience helping small businesses and has owned 5 businesses herself. The passion to eradicate toxic workplaces comes from a place a lot of us can resonate with. When Erin was an employee at a company with a toxic workplace, she saw firsthand how the culture impacted everyone on a deep level. The toxic workplace reduced morale and productivity, followed her home, and led good employees to quit. She dreams of changing people's lives by helping them realize that they are deeply worthy. She also dreams about being the next Stevie Nicks and being friends with the Dalai Lama. I love that. Yes, put me in the same, like whatever boat you're riding on, put me in that boat.
Yeah, you got it.
Yes, her magic powers are empathy, ability to read people, coming up with new and awesome ideas, and making a perfectly cooked filet mignon. As the owner of Zephyr Recruiting, she oversees an amazing work-at-home team who shares her passion for supporting great places to work. I love it, Erin. This is so fun. I feel like we're going to have lots of great stuff to talk about.
Welcome. Oh, yeah. Thank you so much. I'm really excited to be here.
Yes, absolutely. So share with us how you got started in this world, the recruiting world, fitting employees to the companies. Like, talk to us a little bit about your path.
Yeah, it's one of those stories where I didn't really realize how connected my whole story was until I arrived, right? So I have been an employee a number of times, as most people have, and I have an entrepreneurial spirit. So, I wasn't always the best employee, truth be told. I often had my own ideas about how to do things, but for some reason, the truth is that I seemed to attract myself to toxic workplaces. They just over and over again. I just seem to have this, I did for a long time blamed it outside stream of bad luck. Bosses are terrible. I had all the excuses, but over time, my path in life took me here. And I will tell you a little bit more about how I got to Zephyr specifically. But once it arrived, like once I really got to that place of realizing this is what I needed to do, this was part of my mission, was that big aha moment of, oh, life has been giving me all of these toxic workplaces and owning my own business and needing to be a leader myself to bring me to this place. Like this is very intentional in my, woo-woo way of being, which I know you can resonate with, but the universe brought me here on purpose. So how I pivoted, or how I ended up with Zephyr in particular, is prior to Zephyr, I was a business coach and I worked with small business owners. And the primary function that I would help them figure out is how to scale, how to systematize, how to, take the next step, how to get out of being stuck and take the next step. And oftentimes that would result through our work to where they needed to bring on team members, whether it was their first hire or their 15th hire, it didn't matter, but it always meant we need to bring on more people in order to realize the growth we want to realize. But they were already working 60 hours a week, and just had no bandwidth to be able to recruit. And then, or it was either that or they had made a lot of bad hires in the past. They were not taught how to be a recruiter. That's the one thing small business owners are never taught how to do. We're taught how, get a lawyer for your great contract, how to read your books, how to read a P&L, all these things, but it's never how to recruit and find the kind of talent that you need. So they would make terrible hiring mistakes, often have hiring PTSD. And in my history as an employee, I had done a lot of recruiting. So I had the skill. And so I would just start doing it for my clients. Like, clearly, let me just help you take this off your plate. And after a number of years of seeing that part of my business grow organically and just seeing over and over again this deep need for small business employers to have this support, I just decided in 2017 that this was my calling. Like I said, like everything just pulled together and the universe is like banging me on the head going ding, ding, ding. Right. This is exactly what you need to be doing with your life. And there you have it. Zephyr was born.
Awesome. Well, there's a couple of points in there that I love. One is the whole idea of like looking backwards, things connect, and like that point where you're like, oh, this does make sense, right? All of these things have brought me exactly to this place. And I think people who've been there and had that experience know exactly what you're talking about. And people on the other side of that, like hopefully it provides some comfort that if you're on a path where you're like, how does this connect? There'll be a point where it does, right? There'll be a point, hopefully, where that becomes clear. Right. So I love that. And then the other question I had, because when you were talking about, toxic workplace after toxic workplace, my first question is, was it a line of work? Like, was it a particular industry? Was it a particular area, or just, the nature? No, it wasn't. So variety.
No, I'll tell you my theory about this, actually. No, it was not. I bounced around. I was very nomadic when I was in my early 20s and into my early 30s. So for about a good decade of my start to adulthood. And so I tried different careers. I tried different roles, different industries, a number of different things. And so I cannot say, I wish I could just say, well, it was just one industry that needs to be fixed. Unfortunately, it's not the case. What I've realized in my elder years, I'm not elderly, but I'm older. I'm a little older. And what I've realized in being truthfully honest with myself is that I was really the common denominator. And so in looking back and trying to figure out, making sense of this, why did I in particular, and I know other people have the similar story, but what is it about me that was attracted to these types of toxic workplaces, or was it just dumb luck? And the truth that I have really come to realize is that it was a reflection of how I felt about myself. So I was drawn to these types of places to work, even completely subconsciously. It's not like they had big banners that said, I'm a toxic workplace, come work for me, right? They sound just as great in an interview as an employer as the employee does, right?
We wish they came with those warnings. Yes.
That would be so good if we all had that. But clearly we don't. And so, it's easy to just blame dumb luck or just to say, wow, why do, it's other people's fault or whatever. But the truth is that isn't the case. And I really think that that's actually the heart of toxic workplaces is that, when we have either, whatever it is. It could be a traumatic history. It could be just a belief system that was instilled in us as kids. Whatever it is, we go out into our adult world with preconceived ideas of work, preconceived ideas about ourselves and our own self-worth. And your work is going to reflect that. The type of places you work are going to reflect that in the same way that your personal relationships will reflect that, right? Or just about anything. Your health will reflect that. So work is no different. So I hate to say it, but if you find yourself in a lot of toxic workplaces, the truth is it's probably time to do some deep soul searching and try to figure out, why am I being drawn to these places? What is that really about? And only with that awareness, right, can you shift it.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, it's a really interesting topic because, one of the things I care a lot, even through my legal work, is about business leadership, right? And people, whatever size business, even if it's a small solo entrepreneurial shop, like you still have to lead your business. And presumably you're going to be working with independent contractors. If you don't at some point hire employees, like you're still going to have to figure out the pieces and really make that business work if you're going to do it for any length of time. And and so I love leadership generally. I love understanding the way that businesses and organizations work. And, from I had a few years of experience in employment law, right? And I never blame a victim when there's been something atrocious, because you see all kinds of things that happen in the workplace that were not the victim's fault. Right. And yet there is this portion of the conversation, and I think it's really touchy to talk about, but the question I have is how can we empower people? How can we be more empowered, particularly as women, right? So this conversation as it applies to women, I think is really, really important. Yep. And this idea of what can we be in charge of? What can we take control of? And really, and even in observing my sister in her career, because she went from a place of having very little experience to now being very good at what she's doing, to been in direct relationship to the clarity of her boundaries.
Interesting. Yeah, that doesn't surprise me.
Her ability to stand up for herself and even to bosses, to colleagues, to peers, and say, no, that's not happening. Or here's, and redirect something that could have been a potentially problematic scenario. Right. Not only has given her more freedom in her own career, but I think is actually what has helped lead her to the next step and the next step and the next step. And I really think that conversation around boundaries, around self-empowerment, it's so important. So I love this. I love this topic.
Well, and I think you touched too about how there's many layers of toxicity in a workplace as well, right? There's the ones that we all hear about, the really bad, the harassment and the things that are very, very challenging and traumatic. And, that's almost in some ways its own conversation. But there's all these other layers and all these shades of gray of toxicity. And one of them that you just touched on with your sister is boundaries and respecting boundaries and their power relationships and the power dynamics between leadership and employees. And, the questions that I'm sure your sister had to grapple with was, what do I have a right to have boundaries around?
Yes.
And so those are the conversations about toxicity in a workplace and getting down to even there's even little ways that workplaces can be toxic that, you kind of can't put your finger on, but you go home every day feeling relieved when you leave and a stomach ache when you arrive. But, and it's because those power dynamics can be very insidious, unfortunately, and they stem from really deep places for all of us, both the receivers, whether you're the, no matter which, whether you're the leadership or whether you're the employee, you both can be dealing with very deep seated stuff that is playing out.
Yes. Well, and I think there's this huge potential anytime. And I just believe this is the case, that there are always going to be people who are willing to take advantage of others, right? There's just a percentage of people like that in our population. And whether you chalk it up to, personality disorders or whatever else, you have a certain percentage of those people inside of organizations. And and particularly inside of leadership sometimes, right? And in positions of power. And when you pair somebody like that in the same, work setting with somebody who maybe is really empathetic or really, kind of an open book when it comes to feeling and supporting and not super clear on boundaries yet, I think there's really a big potential for things to go wrong.
Right. There is. And I think that's why we hear a lot of those stories, because there is something about that dynamic that actually, I mean, this again is my theory, and I wish I were a researcher so I could really research this deeply, but there is a drawing together of that dynamic, because I don't know if anybody out there, you hear the whole thing in psychology where we're constantly replaying things so that we can fix them or so we can work them out.
Yes.
And again, work relationships are no different than that. So it's often no real mistake that you get a dynamic like you just painted, the leadership maybe taking advantage and probably subconsciously like bringing in employees who are more empathetic, more vulnerable, more open book, because it's easier for that dynamic to play out, right?
Yes.
For both sides.
That's right. So, and we tend to attract and draw in like the next thing we need to learn, right? And when we learn it, we're going to repeat this experience.
Exactly. And that's what happened, for me, because like I said, my being drawn to different toxic workplaces was a lot about self-worth and being treated the way that I deserved, but I didn't, I without going into story, I've got my story as to why I didn't feel I was worthy of that kind of treatment. But once I did the work and I did the internal work and, healed that, I have not worked in another toxic workplace since, right? Like it just stopped. Because it's no longer a reflection that I need to work through. So it can be that powerful if you're willing to do the internal work, right? Like that's, if you really want to turn it around, do your internal work. Right?
Yes. It's, it's just, and there's a lot of nuance to this conversation. Let's be clear that we're not going to be able to cover in our time together, right? All of the layers and the contributing factors and the things that, get people in trouble. But it is interesting to observe how when some amount of toxicity comes in the door, because I think for people listening, right, the question is like, well, how do I know if it's toxic? Like, actually saying out loud it's toxic and labeling it, I think is a challenge for some people. Right. Because our brain wants to rationalize things and we want to like figure it out and not always go to the most extreme.
Right. Yeah.
Right. And, we tend to come up with reasons why and all of this. And also we get to know people in our workplaces and they often become friends or acquaintances or colleagues. And just like can happen in a family scenario where, maybe somebody even becomes a friend, even if they are on the other side of a toxic dynamic, right? There can be struggles that play out where still the group works to keep that person safe or keep them in that position of power or whatever.
Right.
But it's not always somebody in a position of power, right? There are teams where a toxic person is just on the team.
Yes.
But this dynamic around, other people not feeling good about going to work, having physical symptoms, reducing morale, making team meetings harder, right? Talk to us about the ways that it shows up so that people can recognize like, oh,
yeah, well, and like you said, we can't cover every single thing, but I do think you hit the nail on the head. First is start with yourself. You had an issue. I remember you had a podcast about your intuition, and there is an element of that. Trust your gut, trust your intuition. If you really aren't feeling happy to go to work, you may need to stop for a moment and unpack that. Start with how you're feeling, because your feeling is often the window into that something's not right. Correct. So, start there. And then, the truth is that you may never truly understand exactly the toxic and we're using the word toxic, kind of throwing it around, but, in a negative workplace that doesn't fill you up, that doesn't make you feel good, that doesn't excite you, you may never really fully understand why or what the dynamic is, because like I said before, they can be very subtle. There can be very subtle group dynamics going on where maybe you feel slightly like you're outside the group, but at the meetings they talk to you, but do they ever invite you to lunch? These are kind of, like I'm trying to pull simple ones out just to make it relatable. But, you might kind of always go, gosh, you're like, why am I never invited to the happy hour? What's going on here? Well, it could just be that there is sort of a click dynamic. It's just, we're human, and that's sort of how we are. But so start with your feelings and then give yourself permission to also just trust your gut. And you may never fully understand how it's toxic, but other ways that they show up, for ways for me are things like, one that happened to me a lot for some reason. So this is the thing, that I have to unpack is, coming up with ideas, coming up with solutions to problems, and just kind of getting the pat on the head. Oh, aren't you cute? Thanks for your idea. Ha ha. But then having someone else come with a similar idea or something and getting all the accolades and, all the like, wow, brilliant idea. Love that. Let's do that and run with it. And, and that for me, I'm a woman, and it was often the male who got the accolades, and it was me as the female didn't. So that male female dynamic happens a lot. And I would sit there and go are my ideas really not that great? Like, I don't get it. I'm the one who's in it. Well, I feel like I really can solve this problem we're having. And so after a while, I was internalizing it, thinking that I just wasn't smart enough, or I just wasn't, didn't have good enough idea, whatever, all the little stories I told. So it could be as simple as that, where, my boss treated me just fine on the surface. He was kind. He was nice. He, nobody around would say, wow, he's not dealing with power dynamic in any big struggle way. There was no harassment, but he just subtly would never listen to my solutions, even though they were good solutions. I mean, now that I'm older, they were great solutions.
Right.
He just had he has his own issues with me being a woman, I think. Yeah. So that's just one example, there's so many ways it can show up.
So many ways, but I think you raise a particularly poignant one, especially for women listening. Like, even, I grew up in a male dominated industry. It's still heavily male dominated. Like, there's been, unfortunately, very little progress in the legal world towards more equalization. And like most firms and most of the larger organizations within law do not have equal representation or even close to it at the top of their management structures. And so, but, even like what you said just now really hit home, like everything else seems fine. Like I was working with a gentleman who was a mentor in a lot of ways. Like, I really love him. He was a quality person, a quality attorney. And this point that you make about like who gets recognition or which ideas are listened to, right? I was a workhorse and I could do a ton of work, and he still would like put the other person's name on the briefing, or, you know what I mean? Nice. Some of this, like who actually got the acknowledgement for doing the work. And that was a painful thing. And I think sometimes it's only in looking backwards that we're able to really look at those experiences and assimilate them and deal with them moving forward. Because when you're in it, you're like, it can be really hard to know how to address that specifically. Like, well, is it just because, the senior partner gets to choose whose name goes on what? And you know what I mean? It's looking backwards. It's really, really clear. It was because I was female. Right. You know what I mean? I got some other comments because I was female. And there was one at one point that had to do with my looks. That I had. Well, and by that point in my life, I already had a clear boundary around that because I dealt with that issue as a child growing up, like my entire growing up experience. So that one, I was able to look him in the face and say, you're not entitled to comment on my looks. Like, it's irrelevant to my work. And I literally just looked at him and said, I don't want to hear another thing about my looks, right? Off limits. Done. End of story. He never commented again. That never came up. It didn't affect our work.
See, like you had done the work, right, in order to be able to recognize that, because I'm sure if you hadn't, right, you would have been, I know many women who are commented on their looks. And my mother used to work in an industry where a female had to wear a skirt and it had to be right above the knee, and she had to wear heels or pumps or something with a heel, like, and pantyhose. Like, it's astonishing to me that she put up with that, but because I grew up in a different era, but they just didn't even question that. Like, okay, this is how I'm supposed to look in this male dominated industry.
Oh, it's really true. It's really true.
Yeah.
And anyways, I'm sure there's a gazillion examples we could get into, but probably most people listening who have ever been an employee somewhere face this probably in some regard, right? Because I think it comes up in a lot of different ways. There's ample opportunities in the marketplace to see how this plays out.
Yes, it does.
So talk to us about this shift that you have made then. Transitioning from that being part of your background experience into really helping businesses, organizations find right fit employees. Talk to us about this concept of right fit.
Okay. Thank you. Yes. So, in trying to eradicate toxic workplaces, we do this by creating, it's kind of like matchmaking. Like our concept or idea is that we're trying to find the right employee for that company and vice versa. Like it is a two-way street. And when you do find it and it works, it is a beautiful thing, like for both the employer and the employee. And, we work only with small businesses. So we see the evidence pretty clearly. It's pretty powerful when you're in a smaller team that when you get the match right. But so we had seen, a lot of our clients, a lot of clients I had worked with over the years kind of come to me and saying, I want that A player. I want that, top talent. I want, all these things that you see out in the world. And, as I started working with them more and more, I started realizing that this is a really limiting way of looking at employees because, and in small business in particular, I think it's a mismatch of what they really need, because what is an A player to, one, let's say accounting firm is a completely different kind of A player than what would be for a different accounting firm literally down the street. One might need a problem solver who's constantly thinking outside the box for solutions. And another one might be, no, you just need to tick all the boxes because we've got our process so dialed in. I need someone who follows the rules. Those are both A players, right? So we changed the language to be right fit employee. And it's your right fit based on not just your skills and the, like aptitudes and the experience you need the candidate to have, but you also, especially in small business, you really need someone who fits the culture, who's in alignment with your core values, whose goals aren't in opposition to your goals. They don't need to be the same, but you need where their goals and your goals, you can help each other achieve the goals. Like the employer helps the employee achieve their goals and vice versa. So the goals have to have some kind of an alignment where the personality of the person fits really well with the team, the mindset. If you need people who are very growth mindset oriented versus people who are not that fixed is bad, but like I said, being able to follow the rules and go, I trust the process. I don't need to have a growth mindset in this job, So being able to really understand what that right fit employee is for you is critical in finding the right match, finding that right employee. So you have to go beyond the skill stuff. So that's where we came up with the idea of right fits.
Well, this process of recruiting, I think you like you said in the beginning, it's really hard for a lot of businesses to get it right. And even I follow Gary Vee, which millions of other people do too, but even his thoughts on this topic about we all get it wrong. Like you hire quickly, you hire slow, and you fire fast, right? You just get used to recognizing that you've made a mistake and you respectfully let somebody go. What are your thoughts on advice like that? Like just accept that it's going to be hard and you're going to screw it up and you're going to have to try a few times.
I mean, to some degree, yes, because again, we're not taught how to be great recruiters as business owners. So if you're doing it yourself, then yes, I mean, it just is the truth. And even as entrepreneurs, we're making mistakes all the time, right? So, I mean, until you learn how to read your balance sheet, you probably don't even look at it. You probably don't even know what story it's telling you. But once you do, you're like, oh my gosh, look at all the things that I was missing and that I should have been paying attention to. So really, until you learn, of course, we're going to make mistakes. So there is an element of yes, accept. And even in the recruiting industry, we do, I mean, we have misfires every once in a while as well, because we're dealing with human beings. I mean, this isn't, artificial intelligence. We're not dealing with black and white widgets. We're not dealing with robotics or things. We're dealing with human beings. And, we have a very thorough process to try to uncover who that person really is at their core in our interview process. But even with that, people can be guarded. They can misrepresent their skills. You can only do so much in the recruiting process to suss out who they are and what the skills are that they have. So yes, I think it's okay, and forgive yourself. And I fully 100 believe in the hiring slow and firing fast methodology, because especially in small business, it can be excruciating and devastating to hold on to the wrong employee. I mean, it can truly devastate your business.
Oh, I agree. And I think, even being upfront, because my experience, and not that I've hired a ton, even in my own business, I do a lot of project-based hires, and I've got a VA who's been with me for a little while now. I had a VA before that, but it's, like, as a people person, like, it's so easy to get attached to the person. It's so easy to, just like internalize all the feelings of like, oh my gosh, I don't want to have to let this person go, or, cause them any pain. And especially for somebody that has a lot of empathy like that, I find really challenging. The other thing, and last year I spent a huge portion of my time actually leading a team for a firm downtown Seattle. It was 15 people. And there was one individual on there that I would describe as problematic.
Yeah.
Right? And if it had been my team where I had done all the hires from the start, I would have let this individual go. I couldn't do that because I was stepping into the project, and, the firm was responsible for the team. But it made work for other people so much more challenging.
Yeah.
I mean, there were weeks literally where, 70% of my time managing the project involved this person or complications from this person, where I needed to be spending my time managing other things. Right. And this is like, I got to see firsthand how challenging that was, and what what comes in the door when you leave somebody who's the wrong fit on the team.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And it has a huge ripple effect, And I'm sure, you're talking about a team with 15, and in a probably a semi, I don't know the size of the organization, but I'm sure it was felt for quite a ways out. It sounds like, and when you're in a small business, that ripple effect can affect your clients. You can lose clients over it. It can affect your reputation. Clearly you can lose some of your best employees if you let that problematic employees stick around for too long. I mean, that's what I mean by devastating. It can have a huge ripple effect. And it's good that not that I wanted you to have that experience, but it's very eye-opening, isn't it? It's very really eye-opening how powerful it can be.
Yes. Well, we're just going to be very direct, and I'm going to come talk to you about it, and I'm going to respectfully let us part ways so that you can find your best work and we can find the best fit.
Exactly. That's the other side of it. It doesn't do anybody favors, because really, if you look at it from that matchmaking point of view, it's like, I really do liken it to dating. It really is so similar. So you're right. Treat it like dating. You're going to have 90 days worth of dates, and then we're going to kind of decide, or maybe 30 days worth of dates. And if, if I just can't tolerate your warts earlier, then we might have to part ways. But it's really no different. And it shouldn't in some ways be treated any differently than that process either, because you're talking about working with these people for most of your weeks, right? Like if you're working full time anyway, you're spending most of your waking hours with these people. So it's a huge investment to get it right and to take the time. And when you mentioned the being honest, truly the only way to find your right fit is to be honest and be authentic. So, a lot of people, I think it's unfortunately, because institutional knowledge just seems to span generations, we have this idea that you want a job post that is very professional. Well, if you're a fun, quirky place to work, let your job post be fun and quirky. Otherwise, you are going to draw in people who don't fit your culture. So there's all these different steps in the recruiting process that you want to take, but above all, be authentic and be honest about who your company is, including your awards, because it's important for the candidate to see those things too, in order for them to discern if it's the right fit for them.
No, so. I love hearing that, because I've seen, even I've talked regularly on the podcast about the topics I love to read about are either personal development or business, right? That's my joy.
You and me both. Yeah.
Right. I will live in books in either side. And I have hundreds that drive my husband crazy. But the fascinating thing is that you read about the ways that companies hire, right? And they all develop their own systems, and some go to great length to really create for lack of a better word, like a quirky process that really fits the company, so that by the time somebody's walked all the way through that process, if they've stuck with them and they've done like some of the, like I've seen ones where tech companies like will embed a particular kind of problem into the application, and like somebody has to be able to solve that or even know what it means to get through the door, like language or skills or something that would be unique to somebody who is exactly the right fit, and that other people just wouldn't get or wouldn't be willing to do or whatever.
Right. They won't stick through. Great story. We have a client who's an accounting firm. I bring up accounting. It's not our niche, but we do work with accounting firms. And this particular accounting firm is definitely different. They wear shorts and t-shirts to work. They go skiing on the weekends. And one of the things that they do is they love improv comedy, and they use it for team building. Well, they actually bring it into their interview process. So they will put their finalist candidate, so the one who's been through all the interview stuff, the very last thing is a team interview, and they give them, unbeknownst to them, they give them an improv comedy challenge. And they're like, you need to get up and you need to like do this. You need to, I don't know, act like your mother. I don't even know improv comedy myself, but they will give them this challenge. And it's the same thing. It's like the ones that will rise to the challenge, they may bomb. It's not about whether they're good, but do they embrace it? Do they laugh along? Do they rise up? Do they show the courage? Because that's their culture. That's what they demand out of them in their culture and in the kind of work that they do. So, think outside the box and do quirky things if you are a quirky group, be authentic in your process, and you will really find the ones that are the right fit for you, the diamonds in the haystack, because they'll shine through the process.
Yeah. No, that's a great example of that. Yeah. The other thing I've heard, and I have a friend who lives in what is his world? I don't think it's numerology, but it's something like that. It's personality assessment based on certain factors. And he says that companies all the time will come to him to run their people through these personality tests that analyze certain things like communication styles and, whether you're fiscally conservative or whether you have an abundance mindset and, different qualities before they will even do the hire, right?
Yeah,
and I wonder, do you see that in your industry where companies are really trying to, because his philosophy was like, if you have a mismatch, like let's say you have a CEO or somebody who needs to work very closely day in and day out with, for example, like a virtual assistant or an administrative assistant that's going to be their behind the scenes person and they're talking all the time. If they have different communication styles, can really cause a breakdown and an inability for business to get done. Right. And I was like, the length you could go to, right? The length you could go to.
Yes. And, we've got clients who use those kinds of assessments and some who don't. I mean, my only word of caution is you have to make sure that it's benchmarks, make sure it has research behind it, because they can, I don't know, you're the lawyer, but I've seen it open up people to potential discrimination lawsuits. So you do have to be slightly careful. So just do your due diligence, but they can be very powerful. They can reveal a lot about a candidate. They also can be used really to help you understand how to best support that person if you hire them. What kind of leadership, style do they need to thrive, or how their communication styles, like the ways you need to adjust your communication to help them thrive. So they have a place. They definitely have a place, but do your due diligence before you use it, for sure.
Right. I'm sure there's a gazillion, some of which are probably not great for this purpose.
No, they're definitely not. Yeah. You gotta be careful.
So talk to us for a few minutes just about what some of the most common hiring mistakes are. When people are trying to go through this process, even when they've put like a bunch of time into it, what do you see as some of the biggest errors that people are making?
So big companies or small, both, focusing too much on skills and just looking at the resume is one. Really hiring for skill set is going to get you in trouble. I think personally, we do not use artificial intelligence even to parse our resumes, because, and I see great people can fall through the cracks when you rely on artificial intelligence, because, really it's just, if they just didn't put the one keyword on their resume, you've now lost somebody who could have been terrific. So, we use human eyes to help assess human beings. I think that's the best way. The other thing is focusing on skills. Oh, and if you're a small business owner, I just lost my train of thought, Heather. I hate it.
No, that's okay.
I was like, have all these different ideas, but I know it, especially in small businesses, is like you said, the emotional hire, like, oh, you and I just really hit it off. You're
like
fabulous.
we could have coffee.
Let's hit elbows, and I can see myself working with you all day long because you're just cool, and that really is a lot of the time what we see our clients, that's what they're hiring on is but I liked them. They seemed,
yes,
got
this
along
like
really
factor.
well.
Totally.
The like factor. So that's like rose tinted glasses, right? That you wear, even again, going back to the dating analogy, it's like, oh, they were so pretty, and then you find out they're, not at all a good match for you. So, and then the other one we see a lot is like hiring your friend, oh, my friend needs a job. I've got something you can do. I'll hire you.
Yes.
And, there's a great intentions behind that, but we don't evaluate our friends when we hire them the same way you do when it's a stranger. So if you're going to put them through the objective process, just like you would anybody else, that's important. So those are some really big ones that create this sort of mishire right out of the gates. And then, the other one that we see is not checking references, which there's a lot of theories that, people say they're a waste of time, but if you do it right and if you call the correct people, it can tell you a lot. And it's almost always, when somebody didn't present their skill set properly or something, I will say, well, did you check their references? Oh, well, I didn't check their references.
Yes.
So I didn't get that full picture of who that candidate was. So taking the time to put them through an intentional process and check references too.
Yeah.
Cool.
No, it's really interesting to think about. I mean, I appreciate those examples because they're really clear examples. And I never would have thought of using AI for this process, but it totally makes sense that some companies are using this to crunch data. But the thought of replacing judgment with AI, that's a little scary to me. Like I could see how it might supplement, the process, but not replace, human judgment. So that's really interesting.
Bigger
to think
companies tend to use it, and recruiters, to be honest, traditional recruiters use it all the time. That is a big part of how they narrow the pool, is
because they're looking at so many people. Yeah,
exactly. But there's some of us who do it differently.
Right. Well, and this point about checking references, I read an interesting thing one time about companies that build into the actual interview process with a candidate questions around like directly asking them, what would so-and-so who you've worked with for 5 years say your weaknesses are? If I called them right now, what would they say are, some areas where you fall short? Because they say that will get a lot more honesty out of folks. If they know you're going to call that person and ask that question, you might get a direct answer before you even have to do that.
Yeah. It's so interesting. You're actually bringing up a really great point, because one of the things that, if you're really trying to find the right match, one of the things that we should talk about is making people feel safe in the interview process. So oftentimes, we're taught, and the book that really touts that process actually is very similar to this. We're taught to interrogate people in interviews. But if you interrogate people and you make them feel put on the spot and challenged, they are never going to open up and show you who they are. In order to really suss out the right fit person, which is going deeper than their resume and their experience, you want to know who they are as a person. How do they think? What it matters to them, all those culture pieces that are important. Then you have to set up a foundation of safety from the moment you meet. And so when you do interview questions, like there's a way to ask the question that you just put out there that feels safe. And there's a way to ask that question that is going to make someone go, oh my gosh, all right, what's going on? Now all of a sudden I don't feel safe. They're going to call, they're going to interrogate my old boss. What are they looking for? You started all of a sudden, well, then you're not going to get to know that person at all. They're just going to tell you everything that they think you want to hear. That's what they're going to tell you. So you have to be careful. That is the way we do it a little bit. I mean, we do call who we want to call, and we make that pretty clear early on. We're not going to ask you for a reference list. We're going to pick based on the stories you share with us about your experience and your resume, because we really want to get to know you, all of you. And that includes getting other people's viewpoints. So, we try to say it a little bit more like that way. Totally. And so we might say, oh, what would your old boss say when that happened? And that's a way of understanding. It's sort of a twist on that question that you just were asking. Like, what would they say about you? It's more like, well, what did they say in that moment? And so feels more like we're just genuinely curious.
Yes. Easier to answer. Yep.
Yeah. So just, that's a word of caution. If you really like this idea of right fit, shift the tone.
Totally. Ask the question. Yes. And it's great to hear that there's a way to do that is safe and inviting, because, one of the other stories that I read about companies and like putting their, potential employees, their applicants through like a horrendous process, you know what I mean? Of like, yes, like just, never ending interviews and like so many hurdles that if they get to the end, they're like, we've got our person, right? And
right.
Like, I'm curious.
And they persevere and they've got backbone. Right. And if that's the kind of person you need, then great. I mean, if the job is hard and they're going to be put to the test every day, then do that, right? Like put them through a process that tests their resilience, right? But the interview process is the impression that you're giving them of your company as well. So there is a statistic, I can't quite quote, I think it's 41% of employees will leave if they don't, like if the recruiting process doesn't feel safe. Yes. Because they're like, I don't want to work for a company who's doing that to me. I don't want to work for especially healthy people, right? Like,
right. It needs to be more of an invitation.
Yes. An invitation. Exactly. And it's a genuine curiosity both ways. Like we encourage candidates to interview employees of the prospective employer. It's like, you need to also understand the company you're getting engaged with, so to speak. So, do your due diligence and get to know them deeply as well. And so it should be more about a respectful curiosity about each other, a respectful way of getting to know each other. And then that's when, the match gets, even if it doesn't work out, right? You both walk away feeling really good about the experience, regardless, regardless if you decide it's a good fit or not.
Well, and the thing that I like about what you're saying and this, this whole concept that it needs to be mutual. And I feel like for small companies in particular, like if you don't invest in your people, what are you investing in, right? You really have to invest in your people, and which will lead us to the next question about the cost of a bad hire. But before we get there, I was reading the Jim Collins book. I think it's Good to Great. It's about companies that achieve greatness, right? The thing I loved about that and found fascinating, even about companies that took over other businesses, is the ones that achieved greatness, even after a merger or acquisition and had, acquired a whole additional company, is they didn't, like a lot of companies do, just let everybody go, right? And reorganize and do it all themselves. Like they spent a lot of time keeping the people that were already part of that previous organization. And, the way that they describe it in that book is putting the right buns in the right seats. So even if they needed to move people around, they were invested in the people, even people that they didn't have a prior relationship with. Right. And I just, I loved that. I loved that idea of like investing in people and putting them in the right seat, even if it takes a little longer, takes a little more investment, because the trade-off, which leads us to the next question, is what is the cost of a bad hire?
Right. So it ranges. I mean, most statistics show now from a monetary standpoint, only 30% or so. Some go up to 50%, especially for leaders or senior management level. It can be even more costly, but none of that takes into account, again, that ripple effect that bad hire can have. So there's the monetary cost, which 30%, of someone who's 60, 70, 120, $150,000 is no small amount of money. But then you've got, again, the people who might quit because they don't like the bad hire and they're like, I'm not going to work here anymore because you didn't let them go fast enough. Or customers you might lose because they don't, resonate with this new hire. Then you already gave a great example of how much time it took for when you were leading that team and you had the one problematic person, how much of your time they took for you to just deal with the aftermath of their work, right? The mistakes they were making, the way they were affecting other people, whatever. Think of all the things you could have done if you didn't have to spend that 70% of the time dealing with that one person. So especially in small businesses, I mean, as a business owner, I felt it. I know what it's like to have someone who isn't the right fit for my team. Yes. And it is like you have to micromanage just to get through the day with them. So it's like, it's better to cut them loose, really. I mean, the cost is, there's some costs that you just can't even measure, but they're, exponential.
Well, and I'd be open to your advice to small businesses on this, but based on my experience, like the moment that you realize somebody is not a fit for the team or is bringing other people, like that's the moment to really hit pause and say, how far down this path do you want to go? Because I think a lot of people get caught up in the like, well, if I just invest in them a little more, if I just offer more training, if I just do ABC and XYZ, like, but it can take you a long ways down that path.
Yes, it can. So I think, honestly, my advice is, I think it is fair to give people a chance. I think everyone has the possibility to grow. I'm very growth mindset oriented. I believe that people can change. I believe that people are good inherently. And, so you might need to have, I don't know if you know about Kim Scott and her radical candor, but, this idea of like, you may need to have some radical candor where it's, you're come to Jesus moment. It's like, your behavior or the way you're doing your job or something, so whatever it is not working for us. And here's where we need to shift, and tell me what you need from me to help you make that shift. I am happy to provide that for you, but this is your one chance. Like you don't, it's not 3 strikes. It's not 10 strikes.
Yes.
But as long as you're having the open, honest, real, radical candor conversation, you can't do it with the, I kind of wish you would do this a little differently. Like you have to be really clear. But if you're, I can see you nodding and nodding. Like if you are really clear, then they get the one chance, because you just don't have the time to spend months and months trying to figure it out.
Right. And most small businesses don't also have the budget, right?
No,
and
they don't.
It can be tremendously detrimental to a small business, like larger businesses that have a little more cushion and they can spend some time moving buns around on seats, right? With somebody who just doesn't carry their weight, like you just don't have the freedom as a small business to spend too much time there without a big impact to your bottom line.
I think that's the other thing is time too, not just the cost of money, but there's usually in smaller businesses, there isn't the kind of leadership. You don't have layers of leadership to help mentor this person, handhold the person. When you're in small business, you need everybody to be self-managed and, capable of doing their job. Right.
Yes. But I do love that. I do love the idea, because as somebody who also believes in mentoring and developing people, we all need somebody at some point to help mentor us and get us to the next level in some way, right? When we're building our skills. But the idea that it really comes back to clarity. Is there clarity with this person? Is there clarity around expectations? I think is a huge, huge point. Well, I feel like there's so much more we could tackle. This is it's really a fun topic, and it's super important for small businesses to get this right. Super important for them not to waste resources in this department if they can help it, right? And so for folks that are listening to you and are like, oh my gosh, I need more information. I need to work with Erin or learn more about how she helps small businesses. Where do you like to connect?
So there's a couple of places. Certainly our website is just a great wealth of information. So that's zephyrrecruiting.com. And I will spell Zephyr. It is ZEPHYR, and it actually means a gentle breeze. So the idea is that we make building your team much easier and more like a nice gentle breeze. But if you want to connect with me directly, then I'm on LinkedIn.
Awesome.
So it's linkedin.com/IN, which I think means individual in their speak, /Longmoon. So, or just type in Erin Longmoon and you'll find me on LinkedIn. Or through our website. You can email us directly through our website as well. So those are some quick ways.
Perfect. And for those listening, I will share Erin's contact information, the link to her website in our show notes. So you can visit those at legalwebsitewarrior.com/podcast. Now, Erin, I know you have a gift for the audience. Yes. Do you want to talk to us for a minute about that?
Yeah, I do. So we've developed actually with our Right Fit methodology, a full DIY workbook, and you're welcome to use that by going to our website. So it's zephyrrecruiting.com /Right Fit workbook, all one word. And I know you'll have that in the show notes as well.
Yep.
But that really takes this whole concept we talked about today much deeper. And it has steps that you take to come up with your right fit employee avatar. We call them avatars, and your marketing strategy, because it's all about marketing. It's all about speaking to them and pulling them toward you and attracting them to you. And so, there's a whole process behind that. And so that workbook can walk you through it step by step. And then, of course, we're here to help you if you need it.
Absolutely. Wow. That sounds like a phenomenal resource. I mean, I think breaking down this thing that feels hard, that people worry about in business, it keeps some small businesses from growing, right? I think it sounds like a phenomenal tool to actually have like work you can do to make progress on this yourself. And if you need Erin, you can reach out. What final thoughts or tip would you like to leave with our audience?
Yeah, that's such a good question. I mean, there's just so many. I think, probably the strongest, the tip that we kind of touched upon, but is go into the recruiting process with a clear strategy, which you can learn more about from our workbook and our website, but with a genuine sense of curiosity. And if you have that genuine sense of curiosity, then it's going to resonate. It's going to shine through the process. And you don't have to figure out, like, am I doing this right? Am I doing this wrong? If you just kind of go in with that, the candidate will feel it. It'll be an exciting process. It won't be scary, and it will be fun. And so that's the last tip that I would have, is just be really curious about who that person is.
I love that. Well, and you learn so much more when you're curious versus like trying to fit somebody into a certain, round hole or whatever. I think you get the opportunity to get a much fuller picture that way.
Much fuller picture. Exactly. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Oh, I love that. Well, thank you, Erin. I'm so glad that we get to share this conversation with folks who are out there building businesses and trying to figure out how to do this the right way. Yeah. I hope you'll come back and we can chat again.
I would love to. I know there's so many layers, as you said, to this. I would love to. There's many more things we could talk about. So
awesome. Well, big thank you. Yes, I sure appreciate it.
So much. Yep. Thank you, listeners, too. Love being here.
Absolutely. Bye-bye.
Thank you for joining us today on the Guts, Grit, and Great Business Podcast. We hope that we've added a little fuel to your tank, some coffee to your cup, and pep in your step to keep you moving forward in your own great adventures. For key takeaways, links to any resources mentioned in today's show and more, see the show notes, which can be found at legalwebsitewarrior.com/podcast. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast, and if you enjoyed today's conversation, please give us some stars and a review on Apple Podcast, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcast so others will find us too. Keep up the great work you are doing in the world, and we'll see you next week.